On my right is Jack Atchison, and Jack Atchison is the chair of our conservation committee. On my other right is Dr. Peregrine Wolf, and she is the chair of the Wild Sheep Foundation Board of Directors. The three of us bring a unique set of perspectives to the issues today that we'll be discussing. And so with that, I think I would like to lay out our program. We have four presenters. The first presenter will be the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Michelle Turton. The second presenter will be Aybat Muzi from Kazakhstan, so that will be the second. The third presenter will be Halil Karimov from Tajikistan, and our fourth presenter will be Manzoor from Pakistan. And I think Manzoor is surrounded by a group of his colleagues as well. So we'll go through and let each of the presenters present their PowerPoints. And then after they're done, then we're going to open it up for questions. And you'll all be able to ask questions, both those of you in the audience and those of you joining virtually. And we'll try to answer questions. We'll have a bit of a discussion, an informal discussion among the three of us and all of you. So I think with that, when each of you start your presentation, reintroduce yourself and provide your title, and then go on into it. So I think with that, I'd like to welcome Michelle Turton to start off our seminar. This is a Central Asia seminar to discuss all things Central Asia with wild sheep.
So hello, my name is Michelle Turton. I'm a permits biologist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in our International Affairs program in the U.S. CITES Management Authority. And today I'll be talking about permitting the importation of trophies into the United States. So first, I want to talk a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Cincinnati, Ohio. And I've always been very passionate about the outdoors. I love hiking, backpacking, rock climbing, hunting, fishing, pretty much anything that involves being outside. I have a bachelor's of science in zoology from the Ohio State University. My undergrad research was on the historical and current population distribution and abundance of the red-side dace, which is a little fish. And then I got my master's in environmental science with concentration of conservation and applied ecology from Miami University. My main research there was on distance sampling to estimate population density of ungulates. I've been with Fish and Wildlife Service for over 6 years. I started off as a wildlife biologist for the Upper Mississippi River National Wildlife and Fish Refuge. And then I've been with International Affairs for over 3 years now. I wanted to do a quick briefing over the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, better known as CITES. It has 183 parties. It was signed back on March 3rd, 1973, and went into effect July 1st, 1975. It establishes a legal framework together with common procedural mechanisms for regulating and monitoring international trade in species. The purpose of CITES is to ensure that international trade and wild flora and fauna is legal and sustainable. How does CITES work? It's by regulating the export, re-export, import, and introduction from the sea of live and dead animals and plants and their parts and derivatives. It's only 4 species listed under CITES. International trade is regulated based on a system of permits and certificates that are only issued if certain conditions are met and must be present when leaving and entering a country. There are 2 main requirements for permit findings, one being legal acquisition. This is a finding done by a management authority. It's to ensure that specimens on the permit have been legally acquired. The other finding is non-detrimental finding. also referred to as an NDF. It's a finding done by a scientific authority. It's to ensure that the export of the specimen is not detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild, or the import is for purposes not detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild. There are 3 appendices in CITES, the first one being Appendix 1, which is around 1,000 species. These are species threatened with extinction. There's no commercial trade, and it requires both an import and an export permit. The largest is Appendix 2, with around 30,000 species, most of which are plants. These are species vulnerable to overexploitation, but not at a risk for extinction. Commercial and non-commercial trade is allowed. Permits and certificates are required for export, but may not be for import, which is why it's important to check with the importing country to see if a CITES import permit is required, as some domestic regulations are stricter. Here in the United States, we do not require a CITES import permit for Appendix 2 specimens. Last is Appendix 3, which is around 300 species. These are species that are unilaterally listed by a country in the native range of that species at the request of that country. Commercial and non-commercial trade is allowed, and permits and certificates are required for export. Here are some examples of CITES listed species. So CITES listed species can be listed as the whole species, which is the case with the markhor and the urio, which are both listed as Appendix 1. They can also be listed by subspecies, which is the case for the argali, which has 2 subspecies on Appendix 1, and all other subspecies are listed as Appendix 2. And then CITES listed species can also be based off of populations, which is the case for the bighorn sheep, which only the population in Mexico is listed as Appendix 2, where all other populations are not included. Switching gears, we'll talk about the U.S. Endangered Species Act of 1973, or the ESA. The ESA is aimed to provide a framework to conserve and protect species that are listed as endangered and threatened in their habitats. Under the ESA, endangered is a species that is at risk for extinction in all or a significant portion of their range, whereas threatened is referring to species that are likely to become endangered in the foreseeable future. The ESA includes both native and foreign listed species. There's 2,364 species that are listed under the ESA, and 694 of those are foreign listed species. For endangered species, import and export are prohibited without permits. Import and export are also prohibited for threatened species when codified in a 4D rule, indicating such prohibitions are needed for conservation of the species. So important distinction between endangered and threatened. Regulations that implement US wildlife laws are documented in the Code of Federal Regulations. Regulations are referred to by title and part. So the ESA is Title 50, Part 17, which you'll hear me refer to in the rest of the presentation as 50 CFR 17. So before a permit may be issued, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service must first find that the activity, in this case for this presentation, we're talking about import, enhances the survival of the species in the wild. So for endangered wildlife, that can be found in 50 CFR 17.22, in which permits can only be issued for endangered species for scientific purposes, enhancement of propagation or survival, or for incidental taking. That's different for threatened wildlife, where permitting requirements can be found in 50 CFR 17.32. Before I talk a little bit more about enhancement findings, I just wanted to mention that in response to a DC Circuit Court opinion, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has revised its procedure for assessing applications to import certain ESA sport hunted species. We have withdrawn our countrywide enhancement findings for a range of species across several countries. So in their place, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is making finding for trophy imports on a application by application or a case by case basis. So what are the sources of information that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service considers in evaluating each ESA permit application? First is the permit application itself, submitted either by the hunter, legal counsel, or other entity that has power of attorney for the applicant. We also conduct foreign government consultations. We consider information provided by parties that provide relevant information for consideration. So this can be university researchers, professional hunting organizations, safari outfitters, nonprofits. We also use information that we receive from professional meetings or conferences, like the one here today. And then we also like to do site visits when possible. And we also take into consideration concession and operator reports when available. How can an individual hunter contribute to enhancement of the hunted species? One way is by location or outfitter. So hunting in a concession, wildlife management area, conservancy, and so on, that contributes to conservation by reducing threats to the species, providing meaningful community incentives for conservation, and complying with local harvest laws and regulations. Use of fees, so paying hunter license permits or making contributions that are invested in conservation of the species and local community benefits. And most important is, of course, complying with harvest laws and regulations. How can individual hunting concessions, wildlife management areas, and conservancies support enhancement with their hunting area or the broader ecosystem? One great way is by monitoring populations of the hunted species, protecting and improving the habitat of hunted species, such as creating water holes, doing habitat management, protecting winter foraging areas, reducing poaching, reduce human-wildlife conflict by providing community investments, providing incentives for conservation, employing from the local population, and complying with harvest laws and regulations. Lastly, how can governments and other management entities contribute to enhancement? I can't stress this enough, but one of the most important is having reliable and consistent population surveys and establish and use science-based quotas and other science-based harvest measures. Investing fees received through hunting back into conservation. This can be anti-poaching methods, managing human-wildlife conflicts, and population monitoring, and also investing some of those fees into the local community. Another way is enforcing compliance with wildlife laws and regulations. And lastly, implementing of management plans and use of adaptive management. So some examples of ESA listed species, like CITES, ESA species can be listed as whole species or subspecies, such as the case with markhor. Example here being the straight horn markhor, which is listed as threatened. And it has a special D rule, which can be found under 50 CFR 1740D. And then they can also be listed based on different populations, which is the case with the argali, which we'll dive a little bit deeper into. So just a quick reminder, the Argali undercites, there's 2 subspecies that are listed under Appendix 1. All other subspecies are Appendix 2. Under the ESA, the Argali is listed as endangered wherever found except for Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, and Tajikistan. They are listed threatened there, with their special rule being 50 CFR 1740J. This is an example of what a special rule can look like. So for the Argali, it is upon receiving from the governments of Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, and Tajikistan, properly documented and verifiable certification that 1, the Argali population in those countries are large enough to sustain sport hunting. 2, regulating authorities have the capacity to obtain sound data on these populations. 3, regulating authorities recognize these populations as a valuable resource and have the legal and practical capacity to manage them as such. 4, the habitat of these populations is secure. 5, regulating authorities can ensure that the involved trophy has in fact been legally taken from a specified population. And 6, that the funds derived from the involved sport hunting are applied primarily to Argali conservation. And so in order to import an Argali trophy to the United States, you will need the foreign CITES export permit because Argali are listed under CITES. You will also need a US ESA import permit. This can be done using application form 3-200-21. And then you have to use a designated wildlife port so the trophy can be inspected by Fish and Wildlife Service. And you'll need to use a declaration for importation or exploitation of fish and wildlife, also known as a 3177 form. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. And I've included a couple links in case you're curious on a species status of if it's listed under an ESA or under CITES. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Please stay on for questions to follow the presentations. I would like next to go to Aybek Muzbi from Kazakhstan Wildlife Foundation. But before you do there, I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Kurt Alt, and I'm your Conservation Director for Montana International Program. So with that, Aybek, please dial up and start.
Hello, can you please give the feedback, whether you hear me or not?
Yes, we hear you, Aybek.
Okay, so thank you very much. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Aybek Muzbai. I'm the wildlife biologist of Kazakhstan Wildlife Foundation. And today I'm going to present you our project, which is shortly called KACP, which is a short abbreviation for the Kazakhstan Argali Conservation Project. Our project was developed with the cooperation of Wildchip Foundation and Kazakhstan Wildlife Foundation. So today, the content of my presentation will be about the wild chip species in Kazakhstan and their conservation status, KACP project, our achievements and challenges. In Kazakhstan, overall, there are 6 subspecies of wild sheep, which are recognized as Argali. And the first is the largest is Kazakhstan Argali. The number is around 13,000. Then Tianshan Argali with the average number of 2,600 individuals. Karatau Argali, which is about 700 individuals. Altai Argali, which is only 5 individuals, and Kızılkum Argali. Unfortunately, Kızılkum Argali is not it has been already extinct in Kazakhstan, but it's still included to the species of the Kazakhstan list. And then the last but not least, it's Urial, which is not actually Argali, but it's a wild sheep which habitats in Kazakhstan with the average number with a number of around 2,400 individuals, and the total number of wild sheep in Kazakhstan is around 18,705 individuals. So this is a map of the distribution and the habitats of wild sheep of Argali in Kazakhstan, and the Urial is not included to this map as it habitats in the West Kazakhstan. And now I would like to tell you shortly about the Argali conservation status in Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, as in many post-Soviet Union countries, we have our red list, which is also recognized as the Red Book of Kazakhstan. And as you see here, all subspecies of wild sheep are included to this red list in Kazakhstan, which prohibits any kind of use of this species. Also, Argali was also assessed by the IUCN as near threatened species. Inside this, all species of wild sheep in Kazakhstan are listed under the Appendix 2, except of Karatau Argali, which is under the Appendix 1. And according to US Endangered Species Act, Argali in Kazakhstan are assessed as endangered. And now the project we are working for a couple of years, which is called also Kazakhstan Argali Conservation Project. And now I'm going to ask for the several questions as why, how, who, and when. So to answer for the first question as why, it's to improve, to implement, to strengthen, and to show, which is also meant to improve the scientific and the practical base on research disease population model of wild sheep, and also implement resettlement or reintroducing programs to Argali historical habitats, strengthening involvement of all stakeholders as local communities, research institutes, and others, and also show or represent Kazakhstan in the world arena of conservation organization and hunting associations. So how are we going to implement our project is the main approach is limited and sustainable use and management. Who is going to implement the project? The main implementers are Wild Sheep Foundation and Kazakhstan Wildlife Foundation, with the support of Kazakhstan government and other institutions and research organizations. The main question for us is when, and during the last conversation with our decision makers, we are going to start in 2022. So, and now I'm going to give the more wider answer for the questions were listed above. So why are we going, why the project is necessary for us? So I have already shown you this map. This is the distribution and ranges of Argali populations in Kazakhstan according to the national monitoring under the Institute of Zoology. But about 20 years ago, the habitat of Argali and the distribution of population were like this, which means the ranges were more wider, and the list of species also were more. For example, according to the map of Mr. Alexander Berber, who was one of the main implemented the project of sustainable use Argali at the beginning at the end of 90s and at the beginning of 20s. He were mapping two extra subspecies as Savur Argali and Jungar Alatav Argali. Also, one of the main problem of argali management in Kazakhstan that argali is included to the Red Book of Kazakhstan, but people are still poaching argali, and even some of them, they don't even afraid to post such kind of pictures. And the main aim or goal of the poachers is not to get the financial benefits, but the main aim is a meat consumption. For example, according to report from the government, the average number of poaching in Kazakhstan is around 600 cases. And this is a concept of our project, how our project is going to work. So I would like to start from the middle, from Kazakhstan Wildlife Foundation, as you see here. And Kazakhstan Wildlife Foundation has an affiliate status of the Wildlife Foundation in Kazakhstan. And through the Wildlife Foundation, we would like to work with the hunters and the responsible organizations as IUCN and US Fish and Wildlife Service and sightings. So Kazakhstan is going to implement the key ACP project with the support of the government of Kazakhstan, represented by the Ministry of Ecology, Geology, and Natural Resources. And below you can see the facilitators or implementers of our project, which includes Institute of Zoology, RSA Akhozoprom, GMA owners, REC Institute of Biological Safety, Kazakh-Japan Innovation Center, and Kazakhstan Wildlife Foundation. The project is based on 4 main packages. The first package is scientific researches, which includes 4 main activities as study of limited and sustainable use, identification and study of subspecies of argali in Kazakhstan, research on diseases and monitoring activities. The second package is restoration of argali populations, which includes restoration of Altai argali population, restoration of Kızılkum argali, and restoration of argali to its historical habitats. The third package is involvement of communities, and it's called as community-based wildlife management, and it includes 2 big packages as small grants program for the local NGOs and local communities, also involvement of the local community to the conservation and management of key species around their area. The fourth package is measures to maintain and improve the conservation model, which includes 3 main activities as incentives for inspectors, support of GMAs. So GMA, it's a game management area. It's a responsible authority for the management of wildlife inside their area. And the third activity, let's say outcome, it's improvement of legislation of Kazakhstan regarding wildlife management. So this is a table. This is a table about how we are going to use our conservation amount. We start from left. So it's just an example. For example, let's imagine that we have 3 hunters, and through the Wildlife Foundation, we get this amount for the conservation hunting in Kazakhstan, and here you can see how we are going to use this amount. And around 83% of the total amount we are going to use for the study, conservation, and for the local communities. 11% is a governmental fee for the removal of the endangered species, and 3% is for the administrative expenses, and also 3% for the informational support of the project. So what is the number what's about the number and distribution of permits? So here on the map you can see 4 main areas with different subspecies. The largest area is in central Kazakhstan in Karaganda region, where we are going to set the conservation hunting for 6 individuals. From East Kazakhstan, it's 3 permits, from Almaty region 4 permits, and 2 permits from the Turkestan region on Karatau Argali. When we were defining these permits, we were looking for the IUCN guidelines of sustainable use and trophy hunting rules, and the removal of maximum 15 argali from the overall number. It's 0.01% of the total number and 1.5% of match males older than 9 years. So what kind of results we expect? First of all, we are going to study the impact of a limited and sustainable removal to build the scientific-based management plan of wild sheep populations in Kazakhstan. Also, we are going to develop a model of sustainable population management through the hunting tourism. And regarding to studies, we are going to make the huge research on disease of wild sheep. Also, we are going to do the DNA analysis and make the genetic library of the wild sheep in Kazakhstan. We are going to improve the security system in the game management areas covered by the project. We are also going to create the bonus system for combating poaching. It's incentives for the inspectors. When inspector is going to get a bonus for the good service, let's say, and also implementation of the program of small grants of environmental and social orientation. It's a small grants for the local communities because local communities needs to feel the benefits from the wildlife. Also, we are going to develop the population model of wild sheep, development a system of monitoring of wild sheep population based on GIS system. Also, we are going to develop the capturing method and the coloring of argali inside the project area. Programs, last but not least, the programs of reintroduction into places of the historical range of Kızılkum and Altay argali. Also, reintroduction of argali to historical habitat in central, south, and East Kazakhstan regions. So what our achievements, what have we done till today? So except of our collaboration with our partners in the United States, our discussions with the Wildlife Foundation, with the hunters, and with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which happened on December, our first meeting, what we have done in Kazakhstan. So the project implementers signed an MOU. Also, project concept was developed and approved among the implementers. First, argali research was implemented with the participation of international experts. And also, one of the main things that we have conducted more than 15 personal and hybrid meetings with the decision makers. We made the round table with civil society and mass media. And one of our main achievement is that during online meeting on December 28th of last year, project team was invited to the Ministry of Ecology for the joint discussion on project start in 2022. So this is a screen from our last meeting. So what kind of challenges we have? The main challenge was that argali status in Kazakhstan and in the United States. As I told before, argali is included to the red list or red book in Kazakhstan, and that means that use of argali is strictly prohibited. And to launch this project, we need the approval from the second person in Kazakhstan, which is vice president, Vice President should sign the governmental decree on the use of argali. The second challenge is frequent turnover of decision makers, including ministers, head of departments in the Forest and Wildlife Committee. For example, for the last couple of years, the leading person of the responsible ministry of, first of all, Ministry of Agriculture, then Ministry of Ecology, was changed for 3 times. And also after the changing of the head of the ministry, we always see the changing in the Committee of Forest and Wildlife. Also the last but not least, it's the commercial hunting associations. So I don't say that the commercial hunting associations are against trophy hunting, but the main thing that they want is to implement the project by themselves on the commercial purposes. We always telling that the project of Kazakhstan Wildlife Foundation is not aimed for the commercial hunting activities in Kazakhstan, and we are not going to be on the first place of in hunting management related to endangered species. The main aim of Kazakhstan Wildlife Foundation is to show that the limited and sustainable use of endangered species is able to increase the number and strengthen the conservation and protection mechanisms in Kazakhstan. And regarding the other challenges, for example, about the conservation status of argali in Kazakhstan, we are also managing with this huge challenge. To get the governmental decree, we preparing the specific documents, and we plan to get the approval from, first of all, from the responsible ministry, then from the Vice President of Kazakhstan. So that's all from my side. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Will be Halil from Tajikistan. So Halil, you may start.
So, hello everyone. I was not very sure about what my presentation should be, which is why I prepared a very typical standard presentation about our work, which we are doing in Tajikistan. And I made my presentation as saving biodiversity and reducing poverty, the grassroots experience from Tajikistan. Because I think for some of you it will be interesting, but for some of you it will be just, you know, it's your daily routine cooperation with our organization. So my name is Khalil Karimov. I am wildlife biologist. I have studied a Master of Science in Vienna in wildlife conservation, wildlife management, and currently I'm serving as a scientific advisor to the Association of Nature Conservation Organizations of Tajikistan, which is shortly called UNCOT. In this presentation, I would like to very quickly present you the unique approach, unique experience in the Central Asian region, where a non-governmental organization is trying to achieve some impacts in the conservation arena. Before going into the details, I will quickly go through provide you some background. So the Tajikistan is a very young country still. It's only celebrated 30 years of anniversary last year. When we were starting to develop our country, we had also lots of challenges. There was uncontrolled hunting, lots of poaching. There were not enough capacity, not enough governance, and which is why the wildlife was suffering. So many wild sheep species and other species were decreasing. Some of them are completely extinct. And the official protection by law, let's say putting the species in the red lists, were not enough, because the poverty was still forcing people to poach. Criminals were also not following the rules, and which is why we had quite a decrease since about 2000 2,000 of decades after the independence. This is the background just for you. And in Tajikistan, we have, in contradiction to United States, no private land. The entire land belongs to the government. All protected areas, but also not protected by law areas. And the government, as an owner of these areas, can lease all that rights or areas to private operators, to companies, communities, households, and so on, for use and management, of course. And this is not an easy environment when you have this type of, let's say, approach to protect areas which are, let's say, of high biodiversity value, at the same time require big dedication and big financial investments. And here, UNCOT is in the position where we trying to connect all those private operators, companies, communities, and households with market for natural resource use in order to protect high biodiversity areas, which are not yet officially protected. It means that some areas which are turned to the hunting conservancies or hunting concessions. And UNCOT is trying to make that bridges between all these partners in order to achieve some sustainability. As we know that wildlife management can be often not sustainable. So what we do as an organization is to create community-based organizations across the country. We provide the tools and skills to the local communities of the remote mountainous villages, how to unite themselves into the organization, how, for example, 10 poachers can create a great top conservancy and have lots of wildlife, can use them sustainably. So in the theory, it's not easy, but in the practice it's even more complicated. So because you interact with lots of people, with lots of stakeholders, and you try to bring all these passes together, it's a very interesting job. It's but it's at the same time very stressful job. So so far there are several successful community-based conservancies across Tajikistan, functioning since almost 10 years, and they are completely independent, which means they recover the population of species there, they use it sustainably, and they can fund themselves. Yeah, and this is a more or less great let's say achievement of our organization. We making sure that those unprotected areas currently protected by villagers and benefiting them, and this is a long-term conservation vision. So one of the activities is to identify and engage with sustainable operators and market. I think this is one of the core zones of our organization, because the market is a tough arena with lots of stakeholders who are actually not interested maybe in the conservation, or simply have not enough capacity to understand about the importance of sustainable use, about the conservation. And UNCOT is quite successful and can be proud of a very good relationship with some business partners who are supporting our conservation work, rangers work since years and years, and are very dedicated, and we appreciate all of the support. Another aspect of our organization is to help to all conservancies with the scientific surveys, because we know that accountability is a part of sustainability. So, and as previously was presented by US and Fish and Wildlife, that reliable surveys are key for the importing trophies to the United States. And we think the same, and we believe that the reliable surveys are the key for the sustainable and long-term conservation and management, and also livelihood, which is why UNCOT is fundraising not only through hunting organizations, but also from absolutely independent hunting organizations, finances to conduct scientific surveys, what it's possible, what it is required, what it is asked, and trying to keep that database and provide when it's requested by any governmental, by any management or scientific authorities. So internationally, but also nationally. Also very quickly about challenges, and I have, there's many challenges, but I have mentioned only 3 of them just for your understanding, that sustainable use of natural resources is misrepresented and often misunderstood by general public. We all know about that, and I think if we will do a little bit better job in terms of showing, not killing, but showing how we conserve, then we would probably achieve that challenge and do not face that negative attitudes towards hunting. So another second challenge is the market very often privileges profits or biodiversity conservation. Market forces are restless, and new concerns require considerable stability and safe investment. This is also a quite a difficult topic we work since years, because to find a reliable market operators nowadays is not so easy, especially if it's international. People have not connection to the areas, to the wildlife. Sometimes they run their businesses, they are in their routine, they need to fund their employers, they need to pay taxes, they need to pay, so they think about how to make maximum income, but how their business is benefiting nature conservation, unfortunately is not of their scope or in their priority list. And we hope future it will also changed, because we already now have some business partners who are putting the conservation priority top, let's say 1, 2 on their let's say of their priority activities. And third challenge, which I'm also describing here, is development of sustainable natural resource use. It's a long process that requires sustained finances and human resource commitment. It's indeed a very long-term process, because when you want to start some sustainable, some good conservation work on the ground, which is functioning, which is sustainable, which is independent, it requires so much time to conduct lots of community meetings, to conduct lots of meetings with governmental stakeholders, to explain how all this functions, why and how and what are the benefits in the short term, but also in the long term. So as I have my opinion that to create a sustainable, independent, community-based conservancy, it requires at least 10 years of dedicated work. If someone wants really to make sure that that organization in the future will be functioning and will be able to finance their conservation activities. So very quickly, the way forward in community management and biodiversity, I would like to mention 4 of them. Is advocate for national and international support, revise and establish legislative and regulatory frameworks, so secure, robust and accessible conservation, finance mechanism, raise general public and market awareness. I think these all are pretty straightforward. Someone would have questions to them, discuss. Then I would like to thank all our partners who were supporting us in the last 10 years because our organization is celebrating its 10 years. And without them, it would be probably impossible to be currently. So thank you very much one more time and look forward to the fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Halil. And we'll move right on into our last presenter for the day, and then we'll be able to open up for questions and discussion. So Manzoor, please start. And yourself again and those that may be with you, if you'd like.
I'm Manzoor Ahmed from Pakistan, and I am on behalf of GBRSP, Gilgit Pakistan Rural Support Program here. And let me thank Kurt that you give us a opportunity to present our presentation on behalf of the Gilgit Baltistan Government, Forest, Parks and Wildlife Department and other institutions. So we are three presenters. Basically, we prepared this presentation for you. That one, me, Manzoor Ahmed from GBRSP, the other, my friend on my right side, he is Dr. Saeed Abbas from Akram International University. And last not the least, Muhammad Asif is from IUCN Gilgit Baltistan. So we prepared this presentation for you. So here is a brief history of the Wildlife Conservation and Sustainable Trophy Harvesting Program in Gilgit Baltistan. The Wildlife and Parks Division under the Charter of the Forest and Wildlife Department was established in 1975 to enforce Northern Areas Wildlife Preservation Act 1975 to conserve, develop, and manage the rare and unique wildlife resources of the Gilgit Baltistan. So, for this purpose, community-based organization program was initiated by IUCN and WWF in early 90s in GB by introducing Sustainable Trophy Harvesting Program. So, a recent scenario of Sustainable Trophy Harvesting Program. It's a brief history of the Sustainable Trophy Harvesting Program in GB. At the 10th CITES Conference of the Parties, Pakistan requested a quota of the Marco Trophy hunting. A quota of 6 trophies was allocated. At the 12th session, with the quota was increased to 12. So from this quota, it is clear that 80% of the revenue goes to the community, local communities, and 20% to the government department. So they utilize the community, 80% of the resource revenue is used by the community in their different activities. Most of them are related to conservation of these resources. And the same is with the wildlife department, who use this 20% in again in safeguarding these resources. So from here to onwards, my friend Dr. Saeed Abbas, representing Akram International University, he will further elaborate this presentation. Saeed, please.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Manzoor, for giving me an opportunity to present it further. I will add further bit here about the trophy hunting program of Gilgit Baltistan. It was initially started with the trophy harvesting for Himalayan ibex in 1995, where an ibex was hunted in one of the remotest areas of Gilgit Baltistan, named as Bar Valley. The question arises here: why trophy hunting? Why not any other conservation incentive was given to that community? That before this construction of Karakoram highway, which is shortly known as KKH, the community rely more on natural resources. Even in the parkland valleys of these mountains are even today they rely on harvesting these wild species even for their fulfilling their nutrition like protein needs. So these two largest conservation organizations, International Union for Conservation and WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature, Pakistan, they came up with this idea of sustainable trophy harvesting program, for which they developed a payment for ecosystem services program, where they plan to sell these big trophies, and the hunter will take those trophies as a souvenir. And the meat at that time was distributed among the communities for fulfilling their nutrition needs. This sustainable trophy harvesting program of Gilgit-Baltistan is unique in the sense that it's a systematic program. The area which gets quotas, they need to be officially notified as a community managed conservation areas or conservancies first. Then there should also be a viable population of the trophy animals, like International Union for Conservation of Nature has developed these trophy hunting, sustainable trophy harvesting guidelines for government of Pakistan, according to which only 2% of the total population can be harvested, or in other words, 25% of the trophy individuals can be harvested. Also keeping in mind that male to female ratio should be 1 to 6 while giving quotas to these conservancies. So this is a systematic program in all. This slide shows the recent scenario of sustainable trophy harvesting program of GB. This year in 2021-2022, some 100 individuals of Himalayan ibex were the quota were given for harvesting these Himalayan ibexes, for which 50 of the individuals could be exportable. Means international hunters can hunt and transport their trophies with the provisions of the CITES Management Authority of Pakistan. And is my co-presenter mentioned, there are at present in Pakistan 12 markhors can be hunted, sustainably harvested, out of which 4 individuals can be harvested here in mountain areas of Gilgit-Baltistan, and all of which are exportable. Then this year 14 quotas were given for the sustainable harvesting of blue sheep, fulfilling all those criteria mentioned earlier, like the total numbers, male to female ratio, and the availability of harvestable species. For Ladakh Udyaan, we haven't this program yet, but feasibility is being conducted, and the estimated population is between 300 and 400 individuals. We still need further scientific studies before initiating search trophy hunting program for this species. And we have also Marco Polo sheep, but it was once common and lived year-round in the northern mountain ranges of Pakistan. But after this fencing with the Chinese border, it is now limited, and it also migrates for lambing to the Pakistani region. But more recently, a resident herd of some 20 plus individuals were spotted in Click site, that is the area bordering with Afghanistan and near to the Tajik border as well. With this initiation of a sustainable trophy hunting program and a conservation program in Gilgit-Baltistan, the department over the time has established a network of protected areas, right from national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, game reserves, and community managed conservation areas. And at present, we have 56% of the area of total area of GB is under protected areas under different categories. And this picture also shows the distribution of key wildlife species and protected area network that expands over whole of the Gilgit-Baltistan. If you look at the population of key, especially the goat and sheep species, we have some 15,000 plus Himalayan ibexes overall Gilgit-Baltistan, and some 2,000 markhors, the Astor Markhor, Kashmir Markhor. We have 80 to 140 Marco Polo sheeps. And this blue sheep figure right here is a bit exaggerated, but still we have some 1,500 to 2,000 individuals of blue sheep present here. And as I mentioned in the previous slides, we have 300 plus Ladakh Royal individuals present across GB.
So here is the slide about the protected areas of Gilgit-Baltistan. So the figures are here that we have National Park 7, and the area square kilometer is 24,167.73. While wildlife sanctuaries we have 2, and that area is 583 square kilometer. While the game reserves, there are 5 and 909.5 square kilometer. While the 4th, which is the largest one, is community managed control areas. Those are 53, and the area covered by these are 22,406.7 square kilometers. And the total is the protected areas are 67 number, and the total covered area is 48,066.93 square kilometers. So these are the basically we have confined we confined to the goat and sheep species, and we didn't discuss the other species, although those are also important. But the first one is the ibex, Himalayan ibex. The second one is these Astor Markhor. The third one is the blue. This is the Dapuria. The fourth one is blue sheep, while the fifth one is Marco Polo sheep, which has a bit controversial status, is under discussion nowadays that whether it is a resident animal or not. Yes, please. So this is a conservation success, we can call it. That you can see the person standing just near to the ibex. So this is the real picture, and I myself hardly believe that this is the true picture, and the animals not feeling any fear from the person standing just few meters from them. So we call it a success, and the picture tells that how these animals feel. They feel no fear from the human beings.
And let me also add a bit here that this all is because of the involvement of the community. The community have owned these wild goats and sheep. So with their efforts, it is possible that even you can see a boy standing taking a selfie with the Himalayan ibex. This is one of the community managed conservation area in an area near to the border of China. Valley is called Khyber Valley. So there are some problems as well to betterly to manage the biodiversity and the associated habitats of Gilgit-Baltistan. That we haven't that reliable data or documentation, especially about the non-trophy hunting animals and the carnivores. They are also important components of the ecosystem. And then the average household size is still more than 8. This population pressure is also there. Then there are very few conservation organizations. They are involved in the conservation and management of these wildlife species. We also lack in trained human resources here in GB. That is also hindering the conservation program of Gilgit-Baltistan. And this slide here shows the sectoral issues related to biodiversity and habitat. If you see it, the wildlife component, there is still some hunting and poaching in the areas which are still not under the mainstream of protected area categories, and especially the species which are non-trophy animals, there are reports of illegal hunting and poaching of those species, and the habitat is also shrinking with this area becoming emerging as a tourist hub with improving accessibility by constructing these new roads like the Khartoum Highway and many other roads are planned in this area. So the way forward is we need to update the status of flora and fauna, like we have seen here that Kyrgyzstan and some other Tajikistan, they have updated their red list of fauna. We also need to update our list, especially of the key species, and we also need to regularly update this monitoring data. Then we need to link this human need with conservation, which we have already seen and experienced that communities are the key stakeholders. If they own the conservation success is there. And we also need to enhance this public education and awareness about natural resources on border and these wild goats and sheep in particular. Then from this seminar participant, we need cooperation as we have seen that when this even the markhor which is being sustainably harvested in JB is the CITES listed species. But when the conservation program was started with this sustainable harvesting, there were in Gilgit-Baltistan less than 200 individuals were left. But we have seen over the last 2 decades with this sustainable harvesting communities getting the 80% of the revenue, the numbers have increased to 2,000. So we also need to initiate such program for Ladakh Odyar. We need to initiate a sustainable harvesting program for the Ladakh Odyar too. But before initiating this, we need further studies which are under the species of this Parks and Wildlife Department, Gilgit-Baltistan Rural Support Program, and IUCN and other conservation organizations. They are conducting these surveys to see whether we can start this sustainable harvesting program for Ladakh Odyar too. And the first or second slide, they already depicted that more than 55% of the area is under conservation mainstream, but still there are some protected areas. They are still the paper protected areas. We need to strengthen this protected areas network by making by reviving and making them functional protected areas. And then there is lack of coordination between the government and private sector, and we also lack in international coordination. So we need to enhance this coordination and also need to enhance institutional capacity. At the moment, the capital that is being invested on natural resources is very limited in the area. So we need to enhance financials and need to increase the human resource who are working for the conservation of these natural resources. And last but not the least, we also need to improve policies. The Wildlife Act, which is functional at the moment, is of the 1975. So since then, much has been changed. So we need to update these policies. And lastly, we also need a political commitment, which luckily at the moment, especially the central government is committed to the conservation of natural resources. Like we have this 10 billion tree tsunami program, which is being implemented all over Pakistan. So with this, we thank you all. From our side, if there are any questions, we are here to respond. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Manzoor. That concludes the formal presentations. I'd like to jump right into questions and discussions if I could. And But before I do, I'd like to give a little bit more background. If you go to our website, the wildsheepfoundation.org, and go under missions and programs, go to conservation. Under conservation, there is a drop down for international programs, and in that you'll see our Central Asia conservation, our Cabernet conservation document. It has 14 points. In general, it's really talking about how do we support and help our partners in Central Asia and Asia build programs. How can we do that? And so the three individuals you've heard from today are part of that effort, working collaboratively with them. They have a great deal of expertise in those countries, but they lack support from other places. So we tend to be an entity that works with them directly, hopefully continues to work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and our involvement in IUCN and CITES as an observer status helps bring a larger voice to their interests and their efforts. I said, so with that, I'd like to ask the first question, and I'd like to ask
Sure, why not?
the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, when it comes to issuing import permits or determining import permits, Michelle, what is your largest frustration? What is the thing that, aside from workload, are there elements of that process that are lacking? Is there information frustrations coming from governments or outfitting interests or hunters? What is your biggest frustration or hurdle to processing those permits?
That's a good question. Thanks for asking it, Kurt. So I would probably say our biggest hurdle is communication. And that's on all regards with making sure that we have a full completed application. Sometimes we have difficulties getting in contact with applicants themselves. And then there's hurdles with also gathering information. That's also required, especially if it's an ESA permit. And depending on the special rules, such as with the Argali, there is a requirement on that specialty rule to communicate with the 3 range states that are classified as threatened for the Argali. And we really need that information in order to do our enhancement findings. So if we don't get all the requested information or none of the requested information, it makes our job very difficult to do an enhancement finding.
On our sound, we're not getting a clear sound, Carl and Seth. We're getting a bit of an echo, so it's hard to understand the last. So if we can work on that a little bit. I'd like to ask, are there any questions from members of the audience? Okay, and what I'll ask you to do is state the question loudly for me, and then I'm gonna have to restate it so they can hear it. And if there's a direction on who you want to direct the question to, please say that.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Saeed Abbas from Pakistan. I just wanted to ask a question for increasing my own knowledge. I'm also working with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which has developed the IUCN Red List categories. So under those, the threatened is a broader term. Under which we
audience question is to Aybek Muzbi from Kazakhstan, and as you presented, and hopefully I get this right, you talked about poaching and the meat issue for meat, and so the question I believe was, is there anything you're doing to address the meat consumption, the consumption issue directly? Prevention of consumption or augmenting, however you might do that. Well, how are you dealing with the apparent lack of meat or the desire to have meat for consumption?
No, the main
sir?
problem,
Close?
yeah, I understood the question. So the main problem is that there is no lack of meat. as a lot of people in Kazakhstan are working in the field of agriculture, so there's no any lack in meat, but people are hunting on our gully because of meat, because it's some kind of free. So you don't have to go to the market and buy because our gully is, let's say, free wildlife, but the government is already elaborated the taxes, the fines for the illegal killing of our gully, which is around maybe $15,000. But in the rural areas where no rangers, where no any governmental representatives who are working on protection of wildlife, people are hunting illegally. So that's the main problem. Yeah, and what we put as a main aim to stop this activity is our package our third package related on working with the local communities. So we would like to make local people to feel the benefits from the wildlife surrounding them. So, for example, in our project area, if we will set the conservation program, it definitely means that the local people in this area will get the financial benefits from the project, and we hope that they will feel that the alive argali will bring more benefits than the dead one.
We have a question from in chat for Michelle. Is that correct? And so, Michelle, thank you for presenting. I have one question. By chance, could you tell us how much sport trophies permit imports have been decreasing or increasing in the US over the past 10 years? That's one question. There's several. How would you explain such a trend, up or down? And then, is there any unique tendency in imports of sport trophies which you observe?
Well, for the first question, I can't really say. I haven't looked at the trade data for that to say for sure if it's been decreasing or increasing in the US over the past 10 years. So unfortunately, I don't have a solid answer there. I can say that a lot of times for trophies, it's based off of what, for foreign trophies, it's based off of what a country's quota is based off of. So when foreign countries increase their quotas for a certain sport hunted trophy, that can certainly increase the potential for US hunters to be importing more sport hunted trophies. So I know over the years for different sport hunted species, like as Pakistan mentioned in their presentation, that their quota went from 6 to 12. So with that increase, there's a potential for more US imports. Is there a unique tendency in imports of sport hunted trophies? I'm not quite sure what that question is, but hopefully that makes sense. Thanks, Khalil.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, Jack and I and Perry have been talking and certainly visiting with Manzoor, and we have a similar issue in Kazakhstan as well, with status under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. And I know that in Pakistan, Manzoor shared with us a plan for conservation management plan for Ladakh gharial, which are listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. So, Jack, you had a question.
I guess this is a question, and also I don't open it to some discussion because it would lead to help all of these regions and the wildlife and lead to funding and research. And what I'm proposing we might discuss would be developing a model program surrounding the Ladakh Urial that would create a conservation permit that is similar to what we've used here with at the Wild Sheep Foundation to help wildlife and basically work with Pakistan and then introduce this new conservation model to the next CITES and how would the Fish and Wildlife Service help prepare that model or add to its value. I guess that's something I'd like us to discuss and prepare, put a deadline on helping these animals and how we'd use a conservation hunting permit for Ladakh Urial and how we could introduce this model to CITES and management people throughout the world. So that's something I like. Maybe the folks from Pakistan could address that, or if we can discuss that potential.
They can't. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, they can.
So did Manzoor, did you hear Jack's question or prompt of a discussion about Ladakh Urial in Pakistan?
Yes, I heard that, and I feel that the example my friend quoted already earlier in the presentation that we did the same with this Astor Mark IV, and when there were about 25 to 30 animals, and we proposed that idea that we can conserve this animal by hunting this animal. So CITES, maybe they realize the fact that it is the only viable solution for protecting the animals, that we should hunt the aged old animal, and then by that generating that revenue, the communities definitely will come up and conserve and safeguard that animal. So the same is with this Ladakh Urial that we have, and initially there were very few number of the animals, and now it has increased, and we have just given the reference in the
Part of this equation is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And, Michelle, could you weigh in when we start looking at introducing conservation permits to a species that's listed as endangered under the U.S. Endangered Species Act? What are the processes that we and our partners in these different countries and your partners need to go through to move it into a 4D rules under threatened to be able to interject conservation permits? Could you explain that a little bit?
Yes, just the clarify, Kurt, are you asking about changing a 4D rule on a threatened species to incorporate conservation permits?
What's that? Do I need to say that again? Say it again? Yes, Michelle, I'm sorry. I thought you heard my response. There's a delay.
Yeah, so it can be a lengthy process to change a 4D rule. And I'm not completely familiarized with the process for doing that, but certainly something I can look more into for you.
Oh, can you sorry. Michelle, maybe let me tackle it a different way. What would be the process of moving a species from our endangered species list to our threatened species list, and under which then we could work on a 4D rule? Is there a process to down list on the U.S. Endangered Species Act that you could share with this group?
Yes, there is a process for delisting and downlisting species on the Endangered Species Act. Ecological Services is the program in Fish and Wildlife Services that handles that. It falls under Section 4 of the Endangered Species Act. So in order for that to happen, Fish and Wildlife Service would need to determine that a species is not, for example, if you're trying to downlist from endangered to threatened, is not endangered based off of a number of factors such as population size, recruitment, stability of the habitat, quality and quantity, control and elimination of threats, or some of those factors. So the process for delisting and downlisting is similar to listing a species on the Endangered Species Act. So typically it would start with a petition to Fish and Wildlife Service. We would do an initial review of the petition to see if a status change or delisting may be warranted based off the information provided solely in the petition. And then that would, if it is warranted, it would trigger a longer review process. So in all, it's around a 2-year process for considering to delist or downlist a species. And again, our office at International Affairs, we do not handle that process. That would be Ecological Services.
Thank you, Michelle. Do we have any thoughts or questions yet coming from the audience? Okay. If not, do we have one on chat?
Kurt, I do have a question.
Ibet has a question. Ibet has a question.
Yep, thanks. So my question is to Michelle Turton. So Michelle, thanks for your nice, wonderful presentation. So my question is about the species which are listed under the endangered category of the Endangered Species Act. So we know that Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, and Tajikistan, for example, they are able to export the trophies to the United States under the conservation programs. Unfortunately, the wild sheep in Kazakhstan is listed in the upper category that makes these activities very difficult. And are there any exceptions for the endangered category of for the species under the endangered category to make the export to the United States if the all requirements were fit by the country who is going to export? For example, the requirements at the conservation issues, monitoring issues, study, and all other things. Or should we first of all work on the downlisting? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So yes, the argali in Kazakhstan is listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. It's been listed there since 1976. Because it's listed as endangered, it has to meet the permit issuing requirements for an import permit under 50 CFR 1722, which specifies that it has to be for the purposes of scientific purposes, enhancing propagation and survival, or incidental take. So personal sport hunted trophy would highly unlikely meet that criteria. So we allow imports of argali from Kazakhstan, but would have to be for those purposes listed under the regulations for endangered species. So if you're looking to expand sport hunting and looking for having US hunters import, your best option would be to submit a petition to ecological services for downlisting from endangered to threatened. And just being threatened isn't a guarantee to allow sport hunting. It would depend on how the special 4D rule is written.
Thank you, Michelle. We have a question, I believe, from Pakistan, Fauzia Quasi. I hope I pronounced that correctly. We are representing the Community Conservation Program of Northern Pakistan, the Gilgit-Baltistan Khyber Village Conservancy. How can organizations help in thorough research and depletion of natural and wild vegetation in the habitats and the sustainable community conservation solutions, inflow of wildlife below the channel area of cultivated land? I'm not quite sure if I got that question correctly, but I'm not quite sure I understand that question at this point. I think he's asking, you know, what role or how important is a village conservancy, and how can they better organize to help manage and conserve these species? And I think that's a question of all of us. That's probably a question for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well, in terms of how they view those activities of local or village conservancies, whether it's in Pakistan and other places. So any thoughts?
I respond? Kurt, can I respond? Yeah.
Question.
Can I respond? We are in the same home, and we perhaps we already discussed that, and yes, it is possible, and it is a unique question, and the same will be there. That unique answer will be there. This is the perhaps only and the lonely question that there we have the seem to be that there is overgrazing issue in the pasture. That's why the animal used to come down, and there can be many more other options or other issues related to this particular attack of this wildlife to the farmers' land, and especially below the irrigation channels. So it is very uncommon here in entire GB that these animals used to come such near to the human settlements. So we have to look into the matter that what are the causes behind their movement or migration towards the human settlements and these grasslands and the public property, like their trees, their plants, and their cereal crops. So it is really an issue, but we have to look into scientifically that what are the causes behind this migration towards human settlement that usually these wildlife do not used to do so. And the same, my friend besides me, and he also want to reply to the question.
I also want to add a bit more on Poja's question. Yes, the conservation organizations, they are not doing is the community expects, but they are putting efforts, relatively smaller efforts in collaboration with government, like this Parks and Wildlife Department of Gilgit-Baltistan in collaboration with IUCN and other conservation organizations like World Wide Fund for Nature and Snow Leopard Foundation. They are working on bringing a human-wildlife conflict management program wherein this issue of the depredation of livestock by the carnivores and damaging of crops and other trees by the wild ungulates is being addressed under that human wildlife conflict program, which hopefully will be launching very soon by the Parks and Wildlife Department, for which they have some provision of funds, like in other conservation organizations are also supporting them to increase that endowment fund, which is under progress.
Okay. I'd like to call on Dr. Wolf to express any concerns or thoughts about disease pathogen concerns, what we can learn together with about Capernet species in Central Asia, how those may or may not apply to our concerns in North America. So.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. I was actually going to turn that into a little bit larger conversation and would like a question. And that is to find out if, here at the Wild Sheep Show, we have the group of North American, Mexico, US, and Canadian biologists and researchers interacting together. And I'm wondering if the countries that support these Asian species have also decided to collaborate and start sharing data, disease data, population data, methods, best practices, if that's something that's going on, and if the service considers that to be a beneficial step that might have any impact.
Yeah. I know that, in conversations with certainly Ibed and Halil and others, that they've talked about creating an expert group of what we would call our wild sheep working group, the biologists, the wildlife disease vets, but organize that and having experts in those and expertise from those range countries, develop some sort of a loose group like we have in North America. And I know that certainly Ibet, you and Halil, you have, and Orkan, also from Kazakhstan, have expressed a great deal of interest. And have you made any more discussions or headway on that?
Helen, could you please repeat very quickly your question? I couldn't hear very well. The network is very slow.
Question is the value and the importance and the interest in creating a Central Asian or Asian expert group of people from the range states, expertise from the range states, to collaborate, to share, to develop common practices, best management practices that you could spread together across the region throughout your countries.
Yeah, there is
disease data and other population level data to help get a better picture of what's happening in Central Asia.
Yeah. So regarding the disease, there is some networks between vets of Central Asian countries. I'm not in that group, but there is definitely vets who are very much involved in Central Asian work. It's not a big group, but still some group which is more or less knowledgeable in the zoonotic diseases across Central Asia. Some of them are very, let's say, remarkable. So everyone is aware about Saiga outbreak, which killed thousands of, and also outbreak in Marhor. So we had a project with Cornell University and still ongoing. You probably know some of them even personally, who made a presentation, I believe, at the IUCN Ungulates conference in Montana a couple of years ago. Martin Gilbert, I think so. But there is also a network of sustainable use and livelihood specialist group of Central Asia. Some of them, including IBAT, are members of that group. It's very silent group. It's not very active, but it is still a group where you can contact and connect and ask questions, and you will definitely get responses from Central Asian range countries. It's not only Central Asia, there is also members from Pakistan, there's also members from Iraq, Iran, and so on. So, but this is all not as much active as in the United States, but we are pioneers, let's say, in that.
Thank you, Halil.
I guess for Michelle, is there benefits? Michelle, is there any benefits in that? Does that help the case at all? More information being shared collaboratively.
Yes, so there's always a benefit with sharing information collaboratively, and here at International Affairs, we're involved in a One Health initiative of achieving health outcomes by recognizing that interconnection between people, wild and domestic animals, plants, and their shared environment. So we would be very interested in seeing those sorts of outcomes.
You're on.
Okay, so I guess any other questions, any thoughts from the audience? Bo, come up so I can hear you, and then I'll have to repeat it.
We're dealing with money a lot in these issues, going to these foreign places, and we want to deal with community, and the government gets a piece, which has some percentages on the thing. Allocation was 80%, 20%. And we sell hunts here. Jack sells hunts. And it seems to me a lot of times it comes up that how does the Fish and Wildlife look at the difference between almost like a net thing that's going to the country and what things are getting sold through and going through all these people to get it to the community? In some countries, it's a large amount of money that just floated out. And what's the Fish and Wildlife look at that when they're talking about values of animals and what percentages are hitting? How do they connect the dots on all of the money?
Transparency.
Transparency.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to, so I'm going to try to repeat the question, and both stay up here in case I need to add clarification. But I think the question was, how does the Fish and Wildlife Service, you know, when you look at a permit being sold or a hunting opportunity sold for a Central Asian country, and certainly some portion goes to the actual government for the permit, and other monies go to other places, and we see money moving through down to into community work. And so the question is, how important, I believe, is transparency of being able to understand where the money goes and what are the benefits or not from the money flow. Am I getting that correct?
Is Fish and Wildlife able to show corruption in the world shows up in between the two?
Yeah.
Sold from the client and ending up in the community.
Right.
And how does Fish and Wildlife try to keep track of that?
Okay. So essentially,
is there a process?
Yeah, essentially, maybe this is more direct to the question can the Fish and Wildlife Service keep track of, you know, when the license is sold and the hunter in the field does his thing, and everything in between is open for corruption or moving money in a non-transparent way? Is there a way, or does the Fish and Wildlife Service try to track the in-between, the gray area of when the money comes in and there's a product at the end, there's a lot of room in between? How do you guys, or can you monitor or track the transparency of those in-between transactions?
So that goes back to what sources of information do we use when we evaluate each permit application, and also goes back to However, a threatened ESA listed species 4D rule is written. So we take into account what's put in the applications. And then it's really important for us to do foreign government consultations and to work with the foreign government on getting information on how they're using the fees from permits that they give out for the take of the animal. So we do foreign consultant, and we also rely on other information provided to us from relevant parties such as university researchers or other professional hunting groups or the IUCN that may look further into how money is being used. So a lot of this comes down to trust between the US government and the foreign government for how hunting fees and licenses are being used and distributed. We're not tracking, beyond that with like an outfitter of where there's the licensing fees, but the outfitter might have a fee of their own. That we're less concerned about, but we're also interested in seeing how a concession might be using those funds. And that's where we would look at concession or operator reports and seeing how they're using it to maybe improve, do habitat management for their own hunting concession or hunting management unit, and if they're doing any sort of community benefits. So hopefully that answers the question.
Sounds like it got to the answer or an answer, at least more clarification. We have maybe just a few minutes left. Any other questions from the audience or online participants? Hearing none, I'd like to close and again, encourage people to pay attention to our international programs. It's complex. We're dealing with, as you can see, real people, real issues, and real significant programs that are important for for Cabernet species, probably the most of which, and the most diverse group of Cabernet species sit in Central Asia and Asia. And so we're heavily involved in that, but that also brings with it elements of involvement with IUCN. And IUCN has several work groups. Peregrine Wolf is a member of the Cabernet Specialist Group. I'm a member of SULI, of the SULI Specialist Group. Jack, I think you are a member of SULI as well. And so these are really important. IUCN is the largest group of scientists in the world. And somebody once told me if I don't like what one biologist tells me, I'll just go down to the street corner and throw out another nickel and talk to another biologist. And that's a funny story. I laugh, but that's not how it works, guys. We have really highly trained and experienced biologists, both within North America, but in this IUCN group. They've been around the block, they've seen it all, and they're willing to go to bat for the resource. So we're involved with IUCN, and then CITES is very strict in a process protocol standpoint, but we are able to obtain observer status in CITES meetings under the right process. The Fish and Wildlife Service supported our application to obtain observer status, and they've been very supportive of all our work. So CITES has a different level of, it's more the legal law aspect, whereas IUCN is more of the biological input. And you put all that together with US Fish and Wildlife Service, our states, our provincials, and now in Central Asia, our government and local, both at the state level in Central Asia and Asian countries, but also at the community level and the government and the state and the county level in those places. You put all that together, it's a big picture, and it's resulting in significant work in Central Asia by us and others with these individuals you heard from today. So with that, I don't know if Perry or Jack would like to add anything else. And
this has been fantastic. Thank you, Kurt. Thanks to all of our guests.
and go to the Central Asia, or go to the our website under missions and programs, conservation, and go to international. And there's a few things on there that you might have interest in, and we'll continue to populate not everything we do, but things that have significant points. And maybe this discussion and these presentations, we can get uploaded to that site at some point in time in the near future as well. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of the sheep show, and stay tuned. And to our collaborators, our presenters, thank you so much for making yourself available. I mean, we've had, everybody is remote. Not one of the presenters were from this state, and only one was from this country. So I thank all of you for taking the time on your Friday evening in Pakistan, in Tajikistan, and in Kazakhstan and Germany, I bet, for weighing in on this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.